Thanks for being here. This is our panel on tips for making money in the regulated market. My name is Kristen Heidelbach-Teramoto, and we're going to discuss some ways that your farm or your business can be more profitable. Just to start, small little recap here. For 20 years, we've operated in a space with no regulations, which gave us a lot of freedom to put together business practices and business processes that made our businesses more profitable. And we could make those decisions with a whole lot of freedom. And we are now staring down the barrel of regulations, which has changed everything, which has changed the way you can do business and how you get things done. So now how are you going to put food on your table? And how are you going to pay your bills? If you're worried about license fees that you can't afford, changes in labor. So with me, I have an awesome panel that is we're going to discuss some of the options that you have. Everything from dealing with a smaller farm to more sustainable practices. So next to me, I have Tina Gordon and Brian Applegarth and Max Meyers. And I want them to take a few moments. Can you guys hear us okay, or am I too loud? They can hear us across the street, great. So I want each of the panelists to tell you a little bit about what they do and where they come from. Tina, you want to start?
Sure. Hey folks, my name's Tina Gordon from Moonmade Farms. Thanks for coming out today and supporting Sungrown and supporting small farmers, being part of the Emerald Cup, and being part of this panel. I'm thrilled to be here, and I would love to talk about just how to navigate these waters. It's really uncertain times, and it's really difficult to make this transition. But I think that the most essential thing to do is to really look into ourselves and to really ask ourselves where our value is. And to, as a small farmer on the land that I'm on, I look around the land and I explore the land and I explore what has created the land and where is the value there, both to me and my value to the land. And so it's in that relationship where I've been able to, it's the source of kind of like nurturing this inspiration to be able to move forward. And as a couple of examples, like something that I was able to identify on the land, we have this it's this beautiful oak grove. There's tons of wood. There's, tons of trees, so tons of wood. There's a lot of rock. There's a lot of clay. And so what we did in becoming more permanent on the land and moving into our gardens is we took the resources that we have, that the land has provided, and we're using rock from the land, we're using wood from the land to build up beds. Instead of building raised beds, we're building right onto the ground. We're going into the ground and we're moving in. And it's been a beautiful exercise of using what the land provides, connecting to the land, but also it's a statement we are here. We're here now. We're not going to be uprooted to run away this year. We're here to stay. And so that for me has been an incredible starting place. And also just figuring out what do I want to do? How do I contribute? Right? And I think that it's a question that a lot of folks are asking themselves. And to really go into your heart and to go into yourself and ask yourself what you have to contribute. And I think that that's the place to start.
Hi everyone, my name is Brian Applegarth. I'm the founder, president of the California Cannabis Tourism Association. I jumped into cannabis about 4.5 years ago, full time. Always been a fan, grew up in NorCal, started smoking weed when I was in 8th grade. And it always, was a positive element in my life. Came back to California after being gone for quite a while in 2013. And my, how cannabis had changed. We had dispensaries and all these things. I was gone for 12 years traveling and living abroad. And I primarily have my focus in the tourism, travel, hospitality sector with kind of a sweet spot for California history and California cannabis culture. So I think it's really important to maintain the legacy of what was built in California. That speaks to the back to the land movement, being self-reliant, looking at what's right around you, being a little less consumer driven, just all these really important messages that kind of circle around the cannabis conversation.
Hey everybody, my name is Max Meyers, and like Brian, I first started smoking cannabis when I was 14, but maybe unlike Brian, I got caught. So my dad caught me, and I got really lucky. I'm really fortunate to be raised by a man that believes in cannabis. So he pulled me aside and said, look, I'm not going to be able to stop you and your friends from doing it, so let me show you a good way to respect this sacrament, to respect this sacred herb that's been used for thousands of years. Many of you might not be aware of this, but in a cave in the Himalayas, they found a 15,000-year-old chillum, fossilized hashish in it. This is a sacred sacrament that's been used by us humans for a long, long time. My father taught me to respect this plant, and he said, if you're gonna smoke it, I want you to grow your own. So when I was 14 years old, my father started me in growing cannabis. So I've now been growing cannabis for 31 years. So I'd like to say that I understand the relationship with this plant and the environment around it. So over the years, I've become more and more passionate about growing cleaner and greener cannabis. And in 1997, I was in a head-on collision on my motorcycle, and that was a major transition in my life. And before that, I was kind of like, hey, dude, let's smoke some herb and go catch some waves, brah. You know, I was kind of the Northern California surfer dude who wanted to jump my snowboard off a cliff. But when I was in the hospital, I had a long time to think about, well, what's the meaning of my life? If all the doctors keep telling me I should be dead from my injury, then what's the meaning of my life? And a friend gave me a book that forever changed my life. She gave me this book called Sol Viva, Solviva, and it was a story about a woman who lived self-sufficiently off the grid, and it just changed my life. So I started heading down the path of ecological design and permaculture. And then in 2006, I'm going to wrap this up and pass the mic back to my colleagues here, but in 2006, I went down this path, and I approached all the growers I knew in the community in Mendocino County and said, hey, I would love to give you all a course. I'll do it for free and teach you how to get to not buy soil, to not buy fertilizer, to not spray toxins on your plants, to not spray fungicides, teach you how to grow the cleanest, greenest cannabis possible. You know what their answer was? Are you crazy? I don't want people in that class knowing I'm growing weed. So it wasn't the right time, but now is the right time. So I'm more passionate than ever to share my success with all of you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, all of you, for being here. So we have one set of regulations that is really supposed to fit for all of California, which makes zero sense because the distinct markets in California couldn't be any more different. If you talk to a Northern California farmer, they're going to have very different needs from, say, a manufacturer who's operating in Los Angeles. Okay, so what we're going to do right now is talk about some different ways, and I bring up regulations because the regulations changed the way in which we can share resources, right? But if we are looking at losing profitability and no longer making the same amount of money, let's talk about some ways that farmers can, right now, tomorrow, some practices you can put in place where farmers can share their resources and also stay compliant, right?
So I think that there are several ways to share resources, and one of those ways is, once again, going back to where is your land? What does your land provide? What is your relationship to your land? What do you do? What is your skill set on that land? So for instance, something that I love seeing is people share heavy equipment. Something that I love seeing is people bartering. So bartering, say, for firewood. One person has firewood. One person, there's a friend that trades firewood for mushroom blocks to build compost. That's great. Some people build compost, some people don't. Trade compost for firewood. Use your firewood to make wood chips. Trade those wood chips for something else. Those wood chips are good for soil building. They're good for making paths. So a really important part of mulching. So what do you have already? Look around and really explore what you have to share and what you have to contribute and what you have to share. So that's a piece. And also, I think stacking enterprises, meaning what else do you do and how else can you get yourself out in the world, you know? And so how do people know who you are? And how do you amplify that message of who you are and what you want to contribute to the world? And if you are an outgoing person, if you are an extrovert, or if you're able to make that happen, you can do that. And if not, combine forces with someone. Collaborate. It's an incredible time to collaborate and to find people who are our good fits to team build and to work together. And once again, it comes back to the core of looking into ourselves.
Well, I absolutely agree with what Tina's saying there, and I would add on top of that, not just sharing physical resources, but sharing knowledge. And that is a major, major, major fear-based challenge in our community. Everybody doesn't want to share their secret. Well, guess what, everybody? We're not inventing anything new. We might be reinventing something that's been discovered over and over and over throughout history. I mean, all you got to do is look back at the Baghdad battery. Right, that's ancient Egypt time. They had batteries in Egypt, so we're great. We pat ourselves on the back, right? We're such smart human beings because we're inventing these batteries, and Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. I don't believe that for a second. All we got to do is look a little deeper, and these inventions have been around. So let's free up the knowledge. There's no such thing as I have the latest and greatest technology. It fills me with more joy and fills me with more sense of gratitude to share what I know. Am I going to live forever? No. Do my techniques help grow cleaner, greener, better cannabis that's better for the grower and better for the earth? Yes. So I want other people to have those practices. So even when I don't make money teaching, I still will teach because I want people to take these practices into their own lives. And not only that, but when they do, like Tina was saying, it's an exchange. They say, hey, Max, I love how you farm worms and how you use worms to improve soil. But have you ever tried adding flour to it on the third week? And if you do, the nitrogen level goes up or something like along these lines. And that's experimentation of the community and research of the community instead of just trial and error from one person. So I think that is an invaluable resource to share.
And this brings up a really good point, and we talked about this. That is, there are going to be times where we need to protect ourselves, right? So what are some ways that farmers can protect themselves when sharing resources?
Well, one of the ways, I totally agree with you that it's all about sharing knowledge right now, and finding that with each other. Like something that I've been imagining is two lobes of a brain coming together, and I think that that's starting to happen like in a much larger way, and also in sort of some smaller ways, And it's like it's sharing knowledge. We're able to actually be out now. We're able to talk about what we do. We're able to shake each other's hands. We're able to have phone calls. We're able to talk on the phone. It's amazing. It's like this incredible sense of freedom. And so with the ability to be innovative and the ability to be resourceful and to be resilient, which is what cannabis farmers are, already in the climate of the times, but to be able to come out of prohibition and to be able to kind of flex what we know already and start doing that together, and then to have allies in the world of business that we're not familiar with, in the world of policy and regulation that we're not familiar with, in being able to do retail that we're not familiar with. It's like we're learning how to really bond with people, how to get to know people who are not like us. But then we find, well, maybe we have more in common than we anticipated, And so there's a beautiful community building that's happening right now. I'm not sure if that but that's something that I'm just obsessed with, is like what is happening with community building. It's fantastic.
Well,
it's like suddenly there's a much more rich, biodiverse culture. And a diverse culture is a healthy culture, yeah?
And you have entire communities that exist based off of cultivating this plant and are struggling to figure out how to navigate this new world of legalization. And it's frustrating and it's scary. And if you have information that you feel is going to continue to put food on your table, that's terrifying to give that up and then possibly lose it. I feel like we're leaving you out.
No, you're good. So, you mentioned diversity, right? And like connectivity to the land and humans reconnecting to each other. And in my opinion, this isn't necessarily about making money in our new regulated booming industry. It's about creating a new way of business, period. Just like tech has built on that, cannabis has the opportunity to really message about how to reconnect with each other and with the land that you live on and with nature, and have this diverse mindset that's inclusive, and all these really important things that I think drive what I consider wealth. And it's not about a bank account, it's about a quality of life, and it's about the world being happier and better and more tolerant. And so the topic of the panel was funny when I read it in my email, because it was just like, oh, interesting.
Me too, because they put the labor person on making money. A panel about making money.
Yeah.
But what you said and what you and I talked about was a really good point, and that is that it's not necessarily walking away with more money. It's
getting to redefine your universe. Like in this, in this where it's at even now, you are in. It's such early times, right? And the innovation's amazing, and the team building and strategic
partnerships. Right now, it's survival. Right now, it's survival and making sure that you can hold on to what you created, and it's
right.
It's not so much about making money as it is being here next year and making sure that we're not gobbled up.
Right, and forming, and that's picking your teams, right? Like it's fun because I've approached it this way. You get to assemble the people you want to work with around you that are on the same vibration, without sounding like a hippie. Like people that you want to look at your calendar in the morning and be like, yeah, I got a rad day. This is going to be fun. This is really cool. And it offers that opportunity because the culture is so vibrant and beautiful, and there's art and music and nature, and I think that's one of the most amazing parts of this cannabis space, of really creating wealth, not just money, but wealth.
I'm glad you added that. I'm glad you added that. So on that note, Max, regenerative organic farming, how does that fit into this discussion? How does that help us?
That's a good question. When I first learned that I was put on this panel, I was challenged. Originally, I had planned on giving you guys my well-developed curriculum. I'm an educator these days. So my passion and my love for growing cannabis has morphed into realizing that I get more wealth in my heart when I run into somebody who says, hey, one of your students came into the dispensary and they couldn't stop bragging about how excited they were about what they learned in your class, and they gave us some cannabis and it was the cleanest stuff we had tested, so we bought it. That to me is more valuable than making a paycheck. So I often tell people I might not live in the biggest fancy mansion, but I have a mansion in my heart from all the inspiration that people, that I've planted seeds of inspiration and the success that people have had. So it was a bit challenging for me to condense this information down to a 10 or 15 minute conversation. But I don't know, Kristen, maybe this might be a good time to segue in, and I could give a quick 10-minute presentation on some practical skills, everyone. Would everyone like to learn some practical skills on how to save a lot of money in growing your cannabis while healing the land, while being more self-sufficient, while being reliant on your own piece of property?
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get into it then. So first of all, I'd like to share, this is the regenerative cannabis model. There was no model when I started in this field, so if there's no model, create it yourself. So I like to use the 7 blades of the cannabis leaf, and I look at those 7 blades and I say, everything represents an input that the plant needs. By the way, what's the one that's missing? My new image in the center there, in the very center, has a heart. Because none of it, you do a test. If anyone wants to do a test, have 3 plants of the identical genetics and tell one you hate it every day. I've done this. And then tell the other ones you love it. The one that you're filling with hate is going to suffer and be covered in mites, and it's going to be traumatized for its whole life. So love is an important part, and I want to make sure that you guys understand. So what are the needs of a plant? It needs water. It needs soil and nutrients. Most plants, whether they're indoor or greenhouse, are going to need some form of energy for lighting or ventilation, heating or cooling. So how do we produce that energy in ways that are the most regenerative possible, the most renewable? Heating, cooling, air conditioning, ventilation. We can use the earth, for example. I draw air through tubes buried in the ground, and they air condition my greenhouse throughout the summer for me. So I'm not relying on energy-consuming built-in China air conditioners, and I'm definitely not relying on all my clients always cop out, and they say, oh, Max, you'd be proud of me. I'm not using an air conditioner. I'm using a good old swamp cooler, evaporated cooler, right? Said, oh, well, that's a good step. How much water are you using a day to cool your greenhouse? Oh, not that much, 700 gallons. That's pushing on a large greenhouse. That's pushing 500,000 gallons a year just to keep your greenhouse cool. So all we got to do is draw air through the earth, ask Mother Earth for help, and she'll give it to us. So let's move on to some actual practical strategies. First thing I teach people is there's no life without water, right? So we should look at water. So how can we save 75% right off the bat of the water we use in growing cannabis? Now getting back to it, Kristen, how do we save money? Well, many of you probably have a water bill. In my neighborhood in Mendocino County, I'm from Willits, a lot of people buy their water for at least half the season. They're trucking up their water because they're losing so much water. Now, all of my students, the best model I can give you guys is my fingers. So this is how water works when you water from above, okay? If you're watering, whether irrigation or by a wand or by a bucket, I'm not criticizing. First of all, how many of you grow cannabis? Can I see a show of hands? Don't be shy. All right, well, I'm not criticizing any of you because I'm going to call myself out first. We've all been watering the wrong way, okay? In the natural environment where the cannabis plant comes from, in the foothills of the Himalayas, do you think there's somebody there watering it above the ground? No. Do you think that it rains after the end of the monsoon season? No. That cannabis plant is grabbing what it needs from the ground and bringing it up. So how can we replicate that in our own cannabis gardens? Well, one method that I teach students is using what's called a sub-irrigated planter or a wicking bed. And basically what this does is it captures any of the water that's not being used and it holds it down at the bottom of the root zone. Now, how many of you will be taught, how many of you have been taught, I'll admit to myself, from all your teachers in the past, anaerobic zones in your root condition are terrible and they're going to cause root disease and root rot, right? Almost all of you. Well, the reality is that's not entirely true, right? The bottom of a root zone, just like the bottom of those tap roots in nature, are in hard, compacted, saturated soils. Do you know what happens in a hard, compacted, saturated soil? It gets very bacterial dominant. And a bacterial dominant soil is going to mine minerals better than a balanced aerated soil will. So you actually want an area of anaerobic life in your soil, but the key is knowing where that exists. You will get root rot if you have anaerobic in your feeder roots, but you won't if you have anaerobic conditions down in your tap roots. You'll actually mine minerals better and you'll need to supplement your plant less. So understanding where you put the water is a huge advantage. So in this case, if we have the water at the bottom, the plant simply wicks up what it needs. Okay, going back to my hand model. Now if I water from above, the water from above is going to continually knock small soil particles down into the soil and fill the orifices where air would fit, right? So every time I'm watering, I'm compacting my soil tighter and tighter and tighter. Any of those of you that grow, I invite you for the first month of putting your plant out into a pot or in a bed, put your finger in the soil. It's going to sink in there nice and soft. Within a couple of weeks to a couple of the months maximum, you're going to break your finger trying to get it into the soil so hard. That's incredibly unhealthy for that poor cannabis plant. I go an entire season with my sub-irrigated planters and I can put my finger in that soil on the day of harvest and it's completely soft because I'm not compacting the surface of the soil and it's drawing up the minerals and the water it needs as it needs it. So real quick, getting back to my hand and I'm going to move on to the next slide. 80% of that water simply goes out of the reach of the root zone, whether through gravity, bringing it down below the reach of the roots and losing it down into the soil, or through capillary effect, pulling it sideways away from the root's reach. In this case, any water we're not using is just held in place until the cannabis plant has a chance to use it. So saving water, we have a lot of ways we can model after nature to save water in our garden. But what about soil and nutrients? Okay, everybody, and now all my wonderful friends and community here that are selling soil and nutrients, I'm not here to attack or trash you or tell you that you have a bad product. But I am here to share that you don't need to buy soil, don't need to buy nutrients. Mother Nature has all you possibly need right in your backyard. And I don't care if you're living in a city with a tiny little side yard, you just need to look a little harder. You have everything you need right on your piece of land. So one of the ways I feed my soil is by using what's called a worm tower, a worm castle, or a worm tube. I often call them worm towers. So the way this worm tower works is if you look here, the gentleman is feeding grass clippings, and this is my favorite thing to feed in the early cycle, the vegetative stage of the plant. I feed grass clippings and I feed coffee grounds. If you feed grass clippings and coffee grounds to your worms, it's going to release a lot of nitrogen. and you're going to have those food available for your plant as it needs it. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll feed the plant the worm tube. I'll put a cap over the top of it, but then I won't feed for a month. And what that does is it allows the compost worms, red wigglers, to feed in that tube, and they're going to run out of food, and then they're going to go down into the soil looking for food. And when they're down there, they're going to move around through your root zone, and they're going to aerate your soil for you, and they're going to feed and water your plant for you. So now you guys are going to kind of get onto my main strategy, and my main lesson of the day is that let nature work for you. We're on a panel here discussing how to make cannabis more profitable, but one of the ways is dropping your bottom line. Okay? I used to take 25 hours of labor to produce 1 pound of cannabis. I now take 1 to 2 hours. And I'm going to share you guys, as far as I know, that's an industry record. And I'm not bragging and boasting about my accomplishments. I'm bragging and boasting about what Mother Nature can do. So finishing this up, once you do is you go ahead and then let's say it's flower time. Well, in the flower season, I'm going to grind up eggshells and I'm going to throw in banana peels. So everything you need in a garden can come right out of your kitchen. You just got to know how to feed it to the soil and when to do that. Well, that's a little tidbit on how to get started. Everybody do some research, look up worm towers. At the end of the day, I'll give you some information on the classes that we hold. You can come attend a class and learn how to build these for yourself. But let's move on to the other strategy. I really want to respect everyone's time. So there's some wood around here. Here we go, some wood. I'm very superstitious. Farming has made me superstitious, but I have not had a problem with mold or pests in 8 years, okay? And the reason for that is not for the latest and greatest product that I bought in a bottle, right? I call that the almighty addiction to the bottle, baby bottle. You know, we're addicted to the almighty bottle. Break your addiction to the bottle. We don't want to be bottle farmers. We want to be earth-based farmers. So how do we get the solutions to our molds and our pests? Well, we learn how to make phenomenal compost. I don't care how good the compost is you buy in a bag. The moment it goes in a bag, it is compressed, it is anaerobic, bags are stacked on top of it, and every day it degrades in quality. You're always going to have better quality compost making it in your own backyard. If you made a bucket this small of live, perfectly freshly harvested compost, it's more effective than a yard of store-bought compost. So make your own compost and learn how to make really good compost. And then you simply make a nice compost tea, spray it on your leaves, feed it to the soil, and you're not going to have any problems with root disease, pests, or fungus. It's worked well for me for a long, long time, as well as a lot of our students. So I got 2 last slides, and I'm going to wrap this up. The other one is, how many of you grow in greenhouses? Okay, only a couple people, but greenhouse design is really important as well. If we do things like bury our greenhouse in the ground, now we don't have to cool our greenhouse nearly as much nor heat it. We have Mother Nature's warm embrace, if you will, keeping it warm in the winter and keeping it cool in the summer. So I try to bury my greenhouses when possible, and then also passive solar design. Here's a great example of what I spoke of earlier, an earth tube. If you see, the cool air is going to be drawn, the warm air in this case will be drawn in through the tube, and then it'll be cooled by the ground, and then that cool air will come into your greenhouse. So just a phenomenal way. And then obviously, if we're going to ventilate our greenhouses, we can look to things like solar fans and automatically operated solar fans, which now just have a thermostat and the solar. Because when do you need a fan the most, everyone? When it's sunny out. So if it's sunny and hot, you're going to have electricity to power that fan. So then I want to wrap up this talk with talking about the importance of going beyond companion planting, okay? So often with my students, I teach them companion planting is like a nursery rhyme. It's like kindergarten. Okay, it's fine, but all companion planting tells you is that this plant is compatible with that plant. We can all do a lot better than that. Okay? The next step is something you might find in biodynamic and biointensive farming. That's called ally planting. How the two plants affect and help each other. Right on. Now you've graduated to 6th grade. But if you're ready to get into the PhD work and the work that I do with cannabis, you form what's called a permaculture plant community, a plant guild. And all of these plants provide a certain function for each other and for the cannabis plant. So for example, I almost always grow chives, garlic chives, which I can eat in my garden, which I can sell at the farmer's market, but I almost always grow them around the base of my plant because it deters pests like the spider mite. And if I do start to see spider mites, I can cut chives, put it in a blender, put some water in there, blend it, mix it 8-to-1, spray it on my plant, and I won't see any mites again for the rest of the year. So it's using that plant to help us in what we need. In this case, we need a biopesticide, but there's other relationships. For example, comfrey. Comfrey is one of the king plants as a dynamic accumulator. The cannabis root can be in a very mineral-dense soil, but it hasn't developed millions of years of evolution on how to mine those minerals for itself as efficiently as something like a comfrey plant has, because a comfrey plant has evolved in depleted soils. So if you grow a comfrey plant near your cannabis plant, it'll draw those nutrients and those minerals out of the soil for you, and you simply cut down the leaves and put it around your plant as a mulch. It composts, the worms eat it, and it's a way to feed your plants. So once again, I don't buy anything, I create plant communities. I make my own compost. I rely on what's around me. If you want to feed your weed, feed weeds to your weed. That is one of my favorite mottos. Why is a weed, everybody? Because it's a very powerful plant that has evolved strategies to mine minerals and what it needs. So those plants are excellent to feed back to your cannabis plant. Everybody has weeds in their garden, no matter how small it is. So those are some good examples on how to get started. For more information, you guys could check out our website. I'm from Green Your Grow, because greening your grow is what I'm all about. You guys could check out greenyourgrow.com. And then I just want to wrap up with this, and then we can get back to our discussion, is that we're here talking about how to save money. I'm personally not going to spend a lot of time with my evolution with the regulation, but I can tell you that something we've all seen is that the price of cannabis continues to drop. So we need to continue to drop the cost of producing cannabis along with it, or we're not going to be in business very long. So what this has done is not only done something good for my heart and made me feel better about the medicine and the way I grow it, but it has cut my bottom line tremendously. Going from 25 hours per pound of labor needed to grow down to 1 to 2 is quite an accomplishment, and I could not have accomplished it without Mother Nature. All right, thanks for your time, guys.
Thank you for that. Okay, so we talked about regenerative cultivation. We talked about using our resources on our land, right? Brian, is there anything else? We talked about leading from our heart and not worried about necessarily making a bunch of, not with greed, right?
But even like the money, like it's an opportunity to really, it's the birth of an industry, right? So it's if you can locate your passion where you wake up every day and feel truly inspired, where you're not chasing money, the money comes. And it's second nature, and you've built a world that you actually enjoy, and it's not chasing margin, it's coexisting with what you're able to create. And I think, so yeah,
Great.
Along the same lines, but yeah.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and we were going to leave the last 10 for questions. Do we have questions from the audience?
Yeah, I had a question. This is something specific. I write about cannabis. I was interviewing somebody who grows cannabis, and he has dispensaries, and he told me that he puts his money in the bank. So I said, well, what's the name of the bank where you go to? And he said, I can't tell you, because if I tell you, then everybody else will want to go to this bank. And I have a special relationship with this banker. I didn't know what to say to him, but what would you say to this person?
No, so I've stayed in the ancillary market. I avoided the supply chain licensed regulated market intentionally. I had a brief stint where I looked into a delivery service, and for me, it didn't deliver the quality of life I wanted, so I stayed out. And I followed my passion, which is tourism, travel, hospitality.
So I would say that we're in a transitional phase, and the thing to embrace is incredible discomfort, because we don't know what's happening from day to day. With something like banking, this is a huge issue. How are we going to solve for this? We don't know yet. Everyone's kind of on their own, and hopefully, sharing information as it comes along. But that said, somebody who may share information like what you're talking about, a very private, personal situation, may lose that not only for themselves, but may put others at risk. And so I think that there's just really getting comfortable with the extremely uncomfortable. It's really beautiful that it's raining today, Our booth is outside. The rain's pouring down. And there's incredible, beautiful people that are at the booth, just like big smiles on their faces and getting through it somehow with the not knowing. So how do you solve for banking? I don't know.
More questions?
I write about cannabis too. And Brian, I'm just curious if you can talk a little bit about what you do and the opportunities that were never there in cannabis before because it was secret, black market. Now you're basically in the tourism business. What does that look like?
It's kind of the concept of it, right? So I came by way of tourism and cannabis because of my my life experience of traveling. I spent a lot of time exploring other cultures and seeing the nuances of what made cultures special. And so I feel like I was kind of groomed for this moment in a way, and I'm really embracing it. So it's not just rolling vehicle tours, but it's I'm finding myself today, and that's what brought me into it originally, was, hey, I'm going to have a cannabis tour company. And, you know, I've been doing test tours for the last 4 years, but where I find myself now is more being a resource to the B2B, like the established travel and tourism industry. It's now, the last 4 years it wasn't like this. It was in the last 90 days. It's went from building, talking about tourism, travel, hospitality, huge focus on history and culture, because I think that's where the magic is. But now it's people raising their hand, needing somebody to help guide that bridge building from cannabis into the hospitality sector and travel and tourism sector. And the fun part for me is I get to kind of fold in my little nuggets of history, culture, Dennis Perone, the hippie trail, 420, being from San Rafael. You know, there's a place called the Castro Castle in San Francisco that was literally like an activist commune that really we're all sitting here today because of them. And it's fun and it's interesting and it teaches compassion and all these things. So, but yeah, as far as how the hospitality has evolved, it's been really a major shift in the last 90 days. Yeah, B2B. Yeah.
And go ahead. More questions?
Hi, I think the best way to start in this tightening economy to actually make money is to put out a better product. You need to find those systems and put those in place. Biodynamics is good in so many ways, but they're having all these patents and all these discussions about certifications and matter. Oh.
We're just trying to do more questions. When I'll give you time to travel back. We have a farmer all the way in the back with fur. Yeah, she's looking behind her.
Thank you. First, let me thank you for all your time and experience in coming here and through the rain and everyone else. I feel like a kindergartner in a college class, okay? I'm a small-time grower, and I feel like I'm getting pushed out. I can't compete. I don't know the market. It's changing so fast. I can't keep up. What would you advise the small grower that's just hanging on? Where do I go from here?
You know, the next panel is going to be about cooperatives. And so farmer cooperatives, and once again, it's about community building. It's about cultural preservation. It's about enhancing culture, right? And so I think it means finding community. It means figuring out how to participate with others, strengthen numbers, and for some small farmers are going to need each other. And so the cooperative talk, I would say check that out.
I have something to say about that. So the travel and tourism sector, part of my body of work that I want to do in 2019 is to advocate for heritage prohibition farm certifications and to support the small farmers, the small legacy farmers, to have first bite at the apple for sampling rooms. So they may not have the big grow, but they can have a way to be involved in the conversation and share their story and their brand. So I think also it's just being innovative. I think it is survival mode, but I think it's also looking at we're California, right? I mean, we're Northern California. This is our story to tell. So let's be looking ahead too and work and collaborate. Like the ancillary, the regulated supply, it all speaks. So it's finding your team, and it's the similar messages, similar ethos, and let me advocate for your small farmers in that certification.
On that note, when I shop for cannabis, I want to buy something from a smaller farmer that I know how it was grown.
Yeah.
And for some reason, now in today's time, if I have a connection, if the consumer has a connection to that farm, and can I name drop right now? Astor Farms has this fantastic little pack of pre-rolls called Harry's Harvest. And it's called Harry's Harvest because they lost their cat Harry in not this recent fire, but the fire before. And I will continually buy Harry's Harvest because not only do they take $2 from every sale. No, I don't work for them. I don't even know them. I just love their product. They donate it to the fire department that helped save their land, but they also named it after the cat they lost. It's small farmers that make that connection to the consumer. And let me tell you, I have a very large group of moms, I call them Chardonnay moms, that want so desperately to understand and use cannabis, but they're too afraid to walk into a dispensary. I walked into a dispensary and I'm not afraid to, and I got side-eye. And I thought, you are marginalizing the group that you are claiming marginalized you. And that's what's going to kill, right? So, I'll be quiet now. Did we have a question in the back? Right there.
That was a great comment, by the way. So I'm interested in micro urban farms. How would one start?
Just one more time, we couldn't hear you.
I'm interested in micro urban farms, and I'm wondering how one would start one.
Well, the answer to that is start small and build on your success and the success of others doing a good job. So if I was doing if I was experimenting, starting my small grow in an urban setting, first thing I would do is look around for my community and see where people are doing meetups, where cultivators are doing meetups. There's almost every community I've been in the last couple of years, I'm always finding, like for example in Sebastopol, there's a meetup at a coffee shop first or second Tuesday of the month. So in each community you find where like-minded people are doing it, and then you find what fits best to your particular style, your particular needs, and most importantly, in my opinion, your particular site. So that's where applying my background in permaculture could help you. So go in there and ask the questions. For example, when I do work in other countries, I build farms in other countries. I don't go in there and say, I'm gonna build a farm in Nicaragua and I'm almighty gringo with all the answers on an ego trip. I go there and I humbly ask the oldest woman I could find who's a farmer, and I ask her how she farms. I go and I find the elder man, the grandfather, and I ask him how he farms. And I learn from their culture and I learn from what works from them, and then I tweak it to meet my own needs. And I'd recommend that you do that. But the best thing I could tell you is to start small and start a worm bin underneath your kitchen sink. And you can learn how to build a great worm bin online, or you can talk to me about it and I'll teach you how to build one for free.
5 more minutes. Any questions?
Hey, Brian. I know besides the tourism work that you do, you also work with the Hybrid Creative, and you've had a pretty interesting insight with other businesses building their brands and growing their businesses. And sometimes building a brand can be expensive. Sometimes it can be something people can work with freelancers or hire in-house. What would you say are some of the ways that you've seen clients that you work with save money by utilizing branding, marketing, packaging, the other types of services that we sell?
So with the Hybrid Creative, I feel like having a specific target in mind is really important when it comes to brands, and having this authenticity that you talk about all the time, and I completely agree. It's this, and it's really a value of the cannabis core, is to give people that space to be kind of the highest expression of themselves, right? And kind of so, and that's one way that the Hybrid Creative especially is unique, being from Santa Rosa and being able to understand and have that kind of legacy knowledge. It's just part of built into our culture. It's smoking pot when you're in 8th grade, and it's just part of the DNA and the culture of Northern California. So in this market, and D'Angelo said this, at ArcView, is it's really about being hyper local and being authentic, knowing what your brand is going forward, and being able to be strategic and knowing what that roadmap is. And I mean, the hybrid now works with some of the global brands and that's where cannabis is. It's insane. It's like these global brands rolling out, and then there's ones with more purpose-driven, specific, hyper-local, and it's exciting times. But as you build your brand from an authentic core and really knowing your targets and being realistic about what that is, yeah.
There's one other thing about that, which is that I think that protection is important in terms of branding and trademarking. So learning about trademarking is really important, and just that process and what that means and how to protect yourself.
I'm gonna let this run a little late because these guys are amazing. Get your brain out here. Anybody got a question for them?
Hi, you'd mentioned that worm thing. Can you go into that since we got
The worm bin?
Yeah.
He wants more about worms.
Well, a good way to get started. I'll let you in on a quick. Remember, we have limited time, so I can only give you some basic concepts. But one of the most important things that I see people doing wrong with worm bins is always having adequate drainage. Because if your worms are oversaturated with moisture, every time you put in an apple core or a watermelon rind or a banana peel, it's 70-80% water. So all that's going to go somewhere. So it ends up at the bottom of your worm bin, and your poor worms go anaerobic and they're drowning and they want to escape. And can't tell you how many times I've come out into my kitchen and I've had worms crawling all over my sink and all over the wall of the kitchen because they've escaped. They won't escape if they're happy, but if they're unhappy, they're escape artists. And they can get through little cracks and little holes in your bin. So you'll know and you'll learn the hard way. The craziest story I know is when I set up a client of mine doing a large worm bin in a barn, and they let them get all really saturated and wet. And they didn't drain the leachate, which is very valuable to feed your plants. So they didn't drain the leachate, the worm bin filled up and up and up, and they came and there was worms crawling along the rafters, falling on people's heads when they came in. So give your worms what they want. They want a lot of air trapped in there. So shredded newspaper, broken twigs, and then of course the main food source is going to be food scraps, either that you could collect on your own from cafes or directly from your kitchen. I also like to feed leaves, particularly oak leaves. Not only is it a good form of carbon for the worms, but it traps air in there and gives them a good environment to move around. So keep your worms healthy. They're going to reproduce and double in population every 6 weeks. And 1 yard of good soil is about $30 to $50. 1 yard of good worm castings is about $500. So it's a very, very valuable resource that you can create right in your own home or in your own farm.
Thank you,
I want to
Max.
thank all of you for being here. We didn't talk to an empty room. Max, thank you so much for your information. I learned a ton. Thank you so much for being here also. Obviously, Brian is involved in cannabis tourism, which is obviously needed out there, and Tina for teaching us about some ways that we can utilize our land and protect ourselves and really kind of hone in on what our assets are. So thank you. If you have any more questions, let us know.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.
I'll be right out here. My table's right out here if anybody has any questions.